Hello, everybody, and welcome back. We are in chapter 14. Notice that the syllabus does jump at this point. Before the midterm, we were going in order, chapter by chapter. At this point, we will be jumping around quite a bit. So make sure that when you're reading before listening to the lecture, that you're reading the right chapters. Now more than ever, when we're outside of the classroom with our online semester, make sure that you are reading these chapters in detail. So, this is a topical lesson, reading the economic news. So we're going to discuss some of the basic concepts here, and I have a couple interesting examples that we can discuss towards the very end. Now, as always, we'd like to start with our thought questions. Unlike in a classroom where I can get a response back, we'll go through the question and then we'll talk out loud. So, the Conference Board, a not-for-profit organization, produces a composite index of leading economic indicators, coincident and lagging economic indicators. These are supposed to indicate the status of the economy. Now, what do I think I mean by these terms, leading, coincident, and lagging? Well, typically, if you think leading, you think out in front. Now, we want to be careful here. Out in front does not mean that this is the most important economic indicator. Similarly, lagging doesn't mean that it's a non-important economic indicator. We're going to see what they actually mean coming up. But it's not based on importance. Our second thought question says, suppose we want to measure the yearly change in the cost of living for a college student living in the dorm the past 4 years. How would we do so? Now, would it be fair to simply say the cost of living has increased by $1,000 because that's what the rent has increased by? Or should there be other factors that we consider, such as inflation? We're going to get into this. Suppose you were told that the price of a certain product measured in $1984 has not risen. What do I think I mean by measured in $1984? Well, this is going to be a direct inflation question, right? If we consider something measured in $1984, what could I buy in 1984 for that amount of money? If we're saying that this product has not increased in price, or the price has not changed, that means in comparable $2020, that would be the same. And finally, how do you think that the government determines the rate of inflation? So this is something that's going to be very important going forward, especially with the new stimulus bill that was passed. If we consider inflation, if we consider that if we're pumping $2 trillion directly into the economy, we're going to discuss how the government actually calculates this inflation. Okay, so let's get into the lesson. Cost of living, the Consumer Price Index, or CPI. So the CPI, the Consumer Price Index, is a comparison of the current costs with a base period cost. So if I think of the original value versus the current value, that's the Consumer Price Index, being able to compare. Now, it says measurements change based on the cost of the market basket of goods and services that a typical consumer would likely produce. We're going to get into what is included in the market basket and a couple issues that could potentially arise. Cost is measured in a base period and subsequent periods. And it says it's best available measure of change in the United States. So this is the best way that we can actually discuss what the cost of a good or service would be is based on this consumer price index. So it says both the CPI and the cost of living index would reflect changes that in the price of goods and services such as clothing and food that are directly purchased in the marketplace. It says, but a complete cost of living index would go beyond this. So there's other things that are not taken into account. Price index numbers. Price index numbers measures the price at one period relative to another period, typically written as a percentage. So if I wanted to calculate the price index number, it's simply the ratio of the current value over the base value, and then to convert to a percentage, we multiply by 100%. So let's look at our example. A college index number. It says a graduating senior wanted to determine how much the cost of attending a college has increased in each of the last 4 years. What she does is uses her initial year, her freshman year, as her base. This includes the tuition, the fees, the books, the room and board. Everything is lumped together. In her base year, in her freshman year, this college in total was $8,600. If this is our base value, we'll say this is 100% of the cost. If the cost is increased over time, and I'm sure we all know that the cost of college is increasing over time, this value will be over 100% going forward. If it decreased over time, it would be under 100%. So if we wanted to compare senior year to freshman year, how much has the cost increased over that 4-year time span? It's the ratio of the current value over the base value. Senior year total cost was $10,400. Dividing that by the $8,600 the base year, multiplying by 100%, we get 121%, or a 21% increase since she started college. In that 4 years, the cost of going to that university increased by 21%. Components of the Consumer Price Index, again, or CPI. First is the base year, or years. Our original base year is from 1913. We're not typically going to go all the way back to 1913. We're going to change our base years as time goes on. That's why we're not comparing back to pre-World War II. All right. Goods and services included. This also changes periodically. There are things that we buy today that weren't necessities 20 and 30 years ago. So it says education and communication were added in 1998, along with food and beverages, housing, clothing, transportation, healthcare, recreation, and miscellaneous. Pre-1998, you didn't necessarily need a cell phone, internet connection, and so on. These are necessities of life now. So these are values that would be included in our market basket. Relative quantities of particular goods and services. So as of December 2002, food and beverages made up 15.6%. Housing, of course, always makes up the bulk, just under 41%. And we can see the other percentages listed. How do we obtain the actual data? It says each month a sampling occurs at about 23,000 retail and service establishments in 87 urban areas. Notice that this says 87 urban areas. One of the major faults we'll see with this consumer price index is that it leaves out people in the rural community. While the majority of people live either in an urban area or adjacent to in a suburban area, there are a large number that live in the rural areas. They're not included in the CPI. Prices are measured on approximately 80,000 items. Rent is measured from approximately 50,000 landlords and tenants. Four major uses. Why do we even want to calculate the consumer price index? Well, the first is to evaluate and determine economic policy. The second, compare prices in different years. The third, to adjust other economic data for inflation. And the fourth, to determine salary and pricing adjustments. We'll go through a little bit of each. If we look at our first major use, to evaluate and determine economic policy. For a government to evaluate how well the current economic policies are working. This is one gauge as to the strength of the economy. Before the pandemic that we're experiencing now, the consumer, and then after the pandemic, we're going to see different values. The strength of the economy is going to change. Our second, to compare prices in different years. If I was renting an apartment for $300 in 1985, what would be the comparable rent in 1995? Well, I can't say that I want to spend $300 10 years later. The value of the dollar has decreased over time. What you could buy for $1 in 1985, you couldn't buy for $1 in 1995. So adjusting for that inflation, what would that rent be in 1995? Well, it would be what? The ratio of the consumer price index, 1995 over 1985, simply multiplying that by the price, the base price. So if I were to multiply the base price by that ratio, we see that the rent is just over $124 a month. We'll do an additional example of this at the end. To adjust other economic data for inflation. As we said, the value of the dollar is decreasing over time. What I could buy for $1 now, I couldn't buy for $1 20 years from now. So if I were to look at any type of plot, the values are going to be increasing over time, but we want to adjust that for inflation so we get an actual sense. We want to know, is my company profitable? Well, the amount of money that I'm bringing in 2010, if I'm bringing in that same amount of money in 2020, my company's actually struggling. Right? We've decreased. And to determine the salary and pricing adjustments. We're going to go through an example at the end where we look at two different jobs. If I have a job offer for $30,000 in one city, if I wanted to go to a city that has a higher cost of living, how much should I ask as the base salary? $30,000 would mean that I'm worse off in the more expensive city. I'd have to find the comparable salary. Criticisms of our CPI, our Consumer Price Index. It says the market basket used may not reflect current spending priorities. We said that the market basket does change over time, but the last big change that we saw was the increase in, if we go back, was the addition in 1998 of education and communication. The market basket will adjust, but it takes time to adjust. So current priorities aren't necessarily what's being reflected. Our second issue is that if the price of one item rises, consumers are often willing to substitute for another. if I were to go into Philadelphia that has the soda tax, I'm not necessarily going to purchase a Coca-Cola. But if there are other non-taxed drinks, like a tea, maybe I'll buy that. If ground beef is rising in price, rising to the point where people are no longer willing to buy it, they're not simply going to stop eating meat. Maybe they'll substitute it with ground chicken or ground pork. Our third, the consumer price index does not adjust for the changes in quality. So this is a big problem. Technology is making older, more, I'll say, technology is increasing so quickly. Our laptops, our tablets, our cell phones, the capabilities that they have are increasing so rapidly, the quality is going up. But with the quality going up, the price is also going up. The CPI does not adjust for the change in quality. It's seeing that we're spending more on things like a cell phone, more on things like a television. But it's not considering the fact that my television is now 4K, that my television allows me to connect to the internet, and so on. Right. The CPI does not take advantage of sale prices. If you're going into a store and you see that one item's on sale, you may be more likely to buy it. If it's not on sale the next week, you won't. The Consumer Price Index does not sale shop. And as we discussed previously, this does not measure prices for rural Americans. So while it has the bulk of Americans, it's not everyone. So we'll come back to this slide. So, leading, coincident, and lagging indicators. It says an economic indicator is classified to whether their changes precede, coincide with, or lag behind the changes in the economy. A leading indicator is going to precede or lead economic changes. It's not the leading as in important, it's leading as in it comes first. It comes before the changes in the economy. A coincident indicator coincides with the economy. They occur at the same time. And a lagging indicator is going to lag behind. It's going to follow the changes in the economy. So if we look here, it says letter codes. So if I look at the code LLL, high leads, low leads, changing lead. CLG, LG, high coincident, low lag, changes lag. Let's go back now to that previous slide. And let's look at some of our indicators. Let's look, for example, at number 39. Percentage of consumers' installment loans that are delinquent after 30 days. High lead, low lead, changing lead. We're able to determine which one of these indicators, and these are all clearly labeled for us. So there are things that will clearly come before a dramatic change in the economy. There are things that are going to happen during the economic change, and then of course things that will lag behind the economic change. Again, we are in the middle of a pandemic right now. We are seeing dramatic changes to the economy. So this is a very topical, relevant section to cover. Okay. Let's look at our examples. In our first example, an internship and career center at the University of California, Davis publishes a booklet called Placement Manual with information to help students find jobs. Included in the booklet is information on the relative cost of living in various cities with instructions on how to compare the salaries. Again, this is based on the 1994-95 booklet, but we could do this for 2020. So, if we consider 100 as the average across the United States, let's look at the indices for our various cities. Dover, Delaware, probably is 107.7, higher than the average in the United States. Atlanta, Georgia, 98.4, lower than the average in the United States. We'll be coming back to this slide. If we were offered a salary of $35,000 for a job in Ames, Iowa, what should we require for that same job in Boston? Well, let's see. Ames, Iowa. Ames, Iowa, down at the bottom here. An index of 98.8, lower than the average in the United States. Where Boston, 142.1. By a quick glance, it looks like Boston is the highest on our list. If I was offered a salary of $35,000 in Iowa and $35,000 in Boston, I may be below the poverty line in Boston, based on the number that we see here. So how would I find the comparable salary? Well, just like we did previously, we'd want to first find the ratio of our indices. So the index for Boston divided by the index for Ames, Iowa. And that's going to be the factor that we multiply our $35,000 salary by. So if I multiply the $35,000 by the ratio of those two indices, I see that if I wanted a $35,000 salary in Ames, Iowa, I would need exactly $50,339.07 in Boston. If I'm offered anything less than that, I'm actually making less money in terms of buying power than I would be in Iowa. Our second example, as topical as it can get, it says, amid the outbreak of the coronavirus, the Consumer Confidence Index fell from 132.6 in February 2020 to 120 in March of 2020. This is actually good news. The experts predicted a value in March of 110, so the confidence index did not fall as much. Let's take a look now. If we were to divide the current value by the base value and convert to a percentage, one indice over the other indice converting to a percentage, we see approximately 90.5%. So if our base was that February value, what we're saying is that we actually lost approximately 9.5% confidence in the market. In the upcoming weeks, we will be going off book. We have 3 chapters remaining before we have a few weeks where we're completely off book. With these off book weeks, I'm going to be sending you reading material. I'm going to be sending out PowerPoints with the voiceover just like I'm doing right now. And I'll also be showing you step by step how we're going to be doing some of our work in StatKey. I'll also be uploading homework assignments, quizzes, and our final exam in those time frames. Make sure that you're keeping up to date with our WebAssign work. If you have any questions for me at all, please reach out to me. WebAssign's the easiest way to reach out to me, but if you send me an email, that's fine. We can meet up outside of listening to the PowerPoints. We can arrange a conference call, if you will, so that we can actually talk to each other back and forth rather than sending emails. You can arrange that, again, through email or through WebAssign. I hope that everybody's home and safe, and let me know if you have any questions.